The air in the lawyer's office felt thick, like dust you could taste. Not stale air, but heavy, charged with the weight of words just spoken. He leaned back, a smile playing on his lips, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Condescending. Cruel. She has no legal claim over anything, he said again, slower this time, savoring each syllable.
Nada. Zip.
We've made sure of it. Every asset, every account, all untouchable by her.
He was talking about me.
To his lawyer, right there in the room with me and my lawyer. He didn't care that I could hear him. Maybe he wanted me to. Wanted me to feel the full crushing force of his confidence, his victory. He thought he'd won before the fight even began. He thought he'd outsmarted everything. He thought I was stupid. I froze. Not from cold, but from a shock so profound it vibrated through my bones. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual brutality, the smugness. The man I had built a life with, shared secrets with, slept beside for years, was dissecting my future like a lab specimen, discarding my worth with a flick of his wrist. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before that moment, life had been comfortable, quietly beautiful, in its own way. Not a fairy tale. No, life rarely is, but it was ours. A shared canvas, painted with years of routine, inside jokes, the comforting presence of another body in bed at night, the easy rhythm of two lives intertwined. We had the house, the one with the big oak tree in the yard, the one where we planned to grow old. We had the cars, the kind that were practical but still felt like a small indulgence. We had the feeling of security, of having built something solid, brick by careful brick. I wasn't the kind of woman who pored over spreadsheets or dissected stock portfolios. He handled the money. He was good at it, or so I thought. He had the head for numbers, the sharp business mind. I had the head for making a house a home, for remembering birthdays, for listening to his long days and offering a quiet comfort. It felt like a fair division of labor, a partnership. He built the financial fortress. I made sure it was warm and welcoming inside. My desires were simple, really. To feel safe.
To feel loved.
To build a future, whatever shape it took, together. We talked about retirement, about maybe buying a little place by the water someday. Small dreams, perhaps, but they were real. They were ours. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, my partner, the man who held my hand during difficult times, the one who promised forever. Trust was the foundation, the bedrock of everything. Without it, what was marriage but an empty contract? The cracks started subtly. A late night that wasn't explained quite right. A phone that was suddenly password protected, face down on tables. A shift in his gaze, a subtle drawing inward. The comfortable rhythm began to falter, replaced by a discordant beat I couldn't quite identify. I told myself I was being paranoid. That everyone needed their space, their privacy. I buried the unease deep down, under layers of denial and the sheer unwillingness to shatter the image of the life I thought I had. Then came the day the foundation didn't just crack, it shattered. A stray document left carelessly on his desk, something about asset protection, trusts, offshore accounts. Words I didn't fully understand, but whose intent was chillingly clear. He hadn't just been managing our money. He'd been building a wall around his money, making sure I had no access, no claim. The dates on the documents coincided with a period when he'd been particularly loving, particularly reassuring about our future. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal, a calculated cruelty delivered under the guise of affection. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a mistake, it was a plan. A meticulous, cold-blooded plan to leave me with nothing if things went south. And clearly in his mind, things were already south. He hadn't told me he wanted a divorce. He hadn't told me anything. He'd just quietly, systematically, been erasing me from the financial picture. Confrontation was inevitable. The shock morphed into a raw, burning anger. How could he?
How dared he?
I laid the document on the table, my hand trembling. His reaction wasn't guilt or shame. It was annoyance. like I'd stumbled upon a minor inconvenience in his grand scheme. "What's this?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to keep it steady. He glanced at it, shrugged. "Business stuff. Business stuff designed to make sure I get nothing." That's when the smile came. The same one I saw later in the lawyer's office. That condescending, victorious smirk. "It's complicated," he said. "You wouldn't understand." "I understand betrayal," I shot back. "I understand you spent years building this life with me, while secretly building a way to take it all away." He stood up, walked to the window, his back to me. "Look," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Things change.
People change.
This is just protecting my interests." "My interests? What about our interests? What about my future?" That's when he said the words that became the soundtrack to the next few months, a cruel mantra repeating in my head. "You have no claim. Legally. It's all protected. You should just be reasonable. Take what I offer you. It's more than you're legally entitled to." He offered me a pittance. A ridiculously small sum that wouldn't even cover a year of living expenses, let alone the future he was so carelessly dismantling. He genuinely believed I was powerless. He saw me not as a partner of 2 decades, but as an obstacle, an easily removed inconvenience. Getting a lawyer was the hardest step. Admitting that my marriage was over, that the man I loved was my adversary, felt like admitting failure on a cosmic scale. My first meeting with a lawyer was disheartening. They looked at the documents, listened to my story, their faces grim. Divorce law felt like navigating a minefield. Assets hidden in complex trusts, shell corporations, it all seemed designed to protect people like him from people like me. They explained the uphill battle, the cost, the uncertainty. It felt like I was standing at the foot of an insurmountable mountain. He escalated things quickly. He cut off access to joint accounts I barely knew the details of anyway. He started moving things, selling things, making it harder and harder to track. He used his legal team, who were clearly well-funded and ruthless, to send intimidating letters, demanding I vacate the house, accept his offer, or face lengthy, costly litigation he was certain I couldn't afford. The house felt less like a home and more like a battleground. Every room, every object, seemed to hum with the tension of our unspoken war. He was still there, sometimes sleeping in a separate room, a ghost in the life we built. His presence was a constant, chilling reminder of his betrayal and his confidence in winning. He'd sometimes leave documents casually on the counter, official-looking papers that seemed designed to confuse or intimidate me. He'd make little comments, veiled threats, smug remarks about how much this was costing me, how much time I was wasting. "You know, fighting this is pointless," he said one morning over the forced silence of breakfast. "The legal system is designed to protect what's rightfully owned. And legally, none of this is yours." His certainty was terrifying. It chipped away at my resolve, day by day. Was he right? Had he truly built an impenetrable fortress around his wealth? Was I fighting a battle that was already lost? The financial strain of the legal fees started to bite. I watched my savings dwindle. The stress was physical, sleep became a luxury, food tasted like ash, my body ached with constant tension. I felt like a caged animal, pacing the same few steps, seeing no way out. Friends offered support, but they couldn't truly understand the complex legal and emotional web I was trapped in. I felt isolated, alone against a man who held all the power, all the cards, and seemed to delight in making me suffer. One night, scrolling aimlessly online, trying to distract myself from the crushing weight of despair, I stumbled upon an article. It wasn't about divorce law, but about corporate fraud, about shell companies, and how they were used to hide assets. It mentioned something called piercing the corporate veil, about proving intent to defraud, about how seemingly complex structures could unravel if the underlying purpose was illegal or fraudulent. A tiny spark ignited in the darkness. My situation wasn't corporate fraud, but the principles seemed similar. Hiding assets, creating structures to avoid legal obligations. In this case, marital division. Was there a way to prove his intent? Not just that he hid money, but that he hid it specifically to prevent me from accessing it during a potential divorce. I went back through everything I had. The documents he'd left out. Old emails. Our joint tax returns from years ago. Receipts. Bank statements from before things went cold. I started seeing patterns I hadn't noticed before. Sudden transfers, new entities appearing, changes in how things were titled. It was like connecting dots in a dark, confusing picture. It wasn't just a matter of tracing money. It was about tracing the story of the money, the why behind each transaction. And then I found it, tucked away in an old folder, mixed in with vacation photos and utility bills, was a printout of an email exchange. It was between him and a financial advisor, dated years ago, long before our marriage truly started to crumble, but after those first subtle cracks had appeared. In the email, he explicitly discussed ways to structure assets to minimize exposure in the event of marital dissolution. He talked about creating trusts, moving funds, making things appear less valuable or less accessible. He wasn't just planning for a hypothetical future. He was actively planning to screw me over while still sharing my bed. My hands shook as I read it. It was chillingly clear. This wasn't happenstance. It was premeditated. This wasn't just protecting his interests. It was actively strategizing to strip me of mine. This email changed everything. It wasn't just evidence of hidden assets. It was evidence of fraudulent intent. It proved that the complex structures he built were not just smart financial planning, but a deliberate act designed to deceive me and the court. It was the missing piece, the key that could potentially unlock the entire fortress he'd built. I scheduled an emergency meeting with my lawyer. I handed her the email, my heart pounding. She read it, then read it again. Her expression shifted from weary resignation to sharp, focused intensity. "This," she said, tapping the paper, "changes everything." She explained that proving fraudulent conveyance or intent to defraud in a divorce case was difficult, but this email was a smoking gun. It wasn't just circumstantial. It was a direct statement of his malicious intent, predating much of the asset structuring. It demonstrated a clear plan to deceive. The battle was still uphill, but suddenly I had a weapon. A powerful one. The despair didn't vanish, but it was overlaid with a cold, hard layer of determination. He thought he was untouchable, legally invincible. He thought his arrogance and his lawyers and his hidden money would win. He thought I was weak and ignorant. He was wrong. The days leading up to the court date were a blur of legal briefs, meetings, and a knot of anxiety in my stomach that never loosened. He continued his campaign of intimidation, his lawyers relentless. They challenged everything, delayed everything, tried to wear us down. He seemed supremely confident, even cocky, during our brief, unavoidable encounters. He probably still believed I had nothing substantial, that I was just grasping at straws. He had no idea what was coming. Walking into the courtroom felt surreal. It was a plain room, functional, nothing like the dramatic courtrooms in movies. But the air crackled with unspoken tension. He was there, sitting with his lawyers, looking calm, almost bored. He avoided my eyes. The hours crawled by. Legal arguments were made, evidence presented. His lawyers laid out their case, detailing the complexity of the trusts, the foreign accounts, arguing that these were separate legal entities, not marital property, established long ago for legitimate business purposes. They painted a picture of him as a shrewd businessman, and me as someone trying to unfairly claim assets I had no right to. They used legal jargon like a shield, deflecting any suggestion of wrongdoing. He occasionally whispered to his lawyers, a small smile playing on his lips. He looked utterly convinced of his victory. Then it was our turn. My lawyer was calm, precise. She presented the history of our marriage, the intertwined lives, the partnership I thought we had. She presented the evidence of his transfers, the sudden shifts in asset ownership during the time he was planning his exit strategy. She dismantled his lawyer's arguments about legitimate business purposes, showing how the timing coincided perfectly with the decline of our marriage and his efforts to hide assets. Then came the email. My lawyer approached the bench, showing the judge the document. She read the relevant parts aloud, the words hanging heavy in the quiet courtroom. Structure assets to minimize exposure in the event of marital dissolution. As she read, I watched him. His casual posture stiffened. The smile vanished. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. My lawyer explained the significance of the email. It wasn't just that he had hidden assets. It was proof of his intent to defraud me, his wife, years in advance of the actual divorce proceedings. She argued that his actions constituted fraudulent conveyance, a deliberate attempt to put assets beyond the reach of the court and his legal obligations to me. She cited case law demonstrating that courts have the power to undo such fraudulent transfers and penalize the offending party. His lawyers scrambled, objecting, arguing the email was taken out of context, that it was just hypothetical planning. But the date on the email, combined with the subsequent actions he took, spoke louder than their words. The smug confidence had drained from his face, replaced by a look of dawning horror. He looked utterly, completely blindsided. He hadn't just forgotten about that email. He hadn't considered that something so seemingly small, something from so long ago, could torpedo his entire carefully constructed plan. He thought he'd covered every angle, closed every loophole. But he'd left one crucial, damning thread. The judge listened patiently, asking pointed questions. The air in the room grew heavy again, but this time, it felt different. Not thick with despair, but with anticipation. Then, the judge delivered the ruling. She spoke clearly, methodically. She addressed the history of the marriage, the assets accumulated. She addressed his arguments about the separate nature of the trusts and accounts. She acknowledged the complexity of the financial structures he had created. And then she addressed the email. She stated that the evidence presented, particularly the email demonstrating clear intent to defraud his spouse before the divorce proceedings began, was compelling. She found that he had engaged in fraudulent conveyance, deliberately hiding marital assets to prevent their equitable distribution. She stated that such actions were a serious breach of marital duty and a fraud upon the court. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Smith," she said, her voice firm, "this court finds your actions to be a deliberate and calculated attempt to deceive and defraud your wife. The assets you attempted to conceal are deemed marital property." And then came the words that made his face go completely white. Given the egregious nature of the fraudulent conduct, the judge continued, "and to ensure an equitable outcome after your clear attempt to prevent one, the court finds it just and proper to award Ms. Smith 100% of the marital assets." 100%. The number hung in the air, a deafening silence following it.
His jaw dropped.
His eyes, previously wide with horror, seemed to glaze over. He froze.
Completely.
His lawyers started whispering frantically to him, but he didn't seem to hear them. He just sat there, a statue of disbelief and defeat. The man who had so confidently declared I had no claim, who had sneered that he'd made sure I'd get nothing, had just heard a judge award me everything. He thought he was so smart. He thought he was playing three-dimensional chess while I was still figuring out checkers. But he underestimated the power of truth, the power of documented intent, and the willingness of a court to punish blatant, premeditated fraud. He got greedy, he got arrogant, and in his certainty of victory, he overlooked the one piece of evidence that proved his malice. Leaving the courtroom was like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into blinding sunlight. The victory felt surreal. 100%. The house, the accounts, the investments he'd tried so hard to hide, all mine. The financial security he'd tried to steal was restored, multiplied. But the feeling wasn't pure elation. It was a complex mix of vindication, exhaustion, and a profound sadness. I had won the battle, yes, and won big. I had proven him wrong, exposed his cruelty, and gained financial security.
But the cost felt immense.
Years of my life with a man who was capable of such deceit. The shattering of trust, the loss of the future I thought we were building. Winning everything financially didn't erase the emotional scar tissue. Standing on the courthouse steps, the city noise washing over me, I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt hollowed out but also strangely strong. I had faced the worst: betrayal, financial ruin, intimidation, and I hadn't just survived. I had fought back, smart and hard. I hadn't sunk to his level. I had found the truth and used the system he thought he'd manipulated to hold him accountable. The house felt different when I returned. No longer a battleground, but a space of my own. The oak tree in the yard seemed to stand a little taller. It was still the house we had planned to grow old in, but now it was just my future within its walls. The money, the assets, they represented security, yes, but they also represented the ashes of a life I had mourned. I didn't feel rich. I felt restored. What was taken was given back, with interest. It was a harsh lesson in the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life, but also a powerful testament to resilience. He thought he could break me, leave me with nothing. Instead, he broke himself, exposed his true nature, and inadvertently handed me the keys to the kingdom he thought he'd locked away. His arrogance was my unintended benefactor. Life isn't perfect, and winning a battle doesn't erase the war that led to it. But standing here now, looking back, I see the woman I was, trusting, perhaps naive, and the woman I became, scarred, yes, but also strong, wise, and fiercely independent. I learned that the most powerful assets aren't always the ones listed on a balance sheet. Sometimes, they're the ones you find within yourself when everything else is stripped away. The determination to fight, the clarity to see the truth, the courage to stand alone. Those were the things he couldn't touch, couldn't hide, couldn't steal. And ultimately, those were the things that won me everything. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.